Ceann Comhairle. As this particular debacle continues, I often wonder and pity that we don't have a 30th of February, because I think a lot of us would like to think that this particular legislation didn't have to arrive here, and indeed that the whole issue of Brexit would evaporate in the interests of all on these islands. I want to start, Ceann Comhairle, by firstly congratulating the Library and Research people in relation to their work for us in relation to presenting the facts relating to this omnibus bill, and indeed the officials in the department who I know quite hurriedly but in a necessary hurry to have brought us to where we are today. I'm very conscious as well that it's not just this issue of the legislation before us, but indeed bilaterals will have to happen, many of them I'm quite sure, to solve this problem if it won't go away, and indeed I'm equally told there will be many memorandums of understanding that will help this process. So I'm not overly concerned, I have to say, that I see that the bill is dealing with issues such as health and cross-border directives and cost, cooperation, working together and things like that. We've been told that people in education, 1,500 of them who travel abroad for their third level education, indeed 200 who come to this country from England, that's all catered for. But I have to remind people when they talk about the common travel area that they need to have lived the border. And I say that because when Theresa May walked in Wales and decided to hold an election, my response to that was, at that time, would you come and walk the border because you might realise the issues that may resurrect again. And it's in that context I want to remind people, I often say I was born in 58, I lived through the early part of the Troubles, I lived pre-EU and post-EU. And the reality is this, we have a lot of talk in the last week in relation to people having to get a green card. I well remember the triptych, and that was where you had to bond your vehicle to ensure you brought it back. Angus O'Snuddig referred to the many myriads of border roads, 38 of them in my own county. Do I need to remind people that there was clear signage 1/2 mile from that border crossing in the form of a blue and white pole that told you if you crossed that point where that pole was, you were certainly on an unapproved road if you had goods. We have the concession roads. The young people in my constituency don't even know or haven't even thought about what it meant. The N53 from Dundalk to Castleblaney, where you weren't supposed to stop when you went in through Cullaville. That was the concession. I fear we're going to get back, and a lot of what we're talking about here is not being debated. So I'm going to try and raise issues in relation to what is not necessarily in the bill. And I say that, thank God, that there's no backstop, there'll be no deal, but equally, but where there's no deal, there'll be no backstop. And there's where the difficulty will be. We had the head of the PSNI last year say that any attempt to return to a hard border would result in division and violence. I often thought that that was maybe scaremongering, but I can tell you the natives are restless. It is inevitable that if they crash out, that there will be some form of checks on the border on goods entering and leaving our country. I want to start with match funding in relation to projects, and again Deputy Snuddig referred to supports. The British Government have said that they would guarantee certain funds up until 2020, and that they would deliver with what they call a UK Shared Prosperity Fund. I ask anybody to read a report by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation in relation to what that commitment is and will be. There is no mention of the border counties that have suffered and the dereliction that has resulted there. The only mention of Ireland and supports relates to the Glens of Antrim and Strabane and Omagh. I ask that this government make a clear commitment that we get in writing that the matching funds, be it Peace, be it Interreg, that we get our fair share. I want to touch now on fishing. Seems to have gone down the river a wee bit. But we have the gunboat returning to Carlingford Lough. How are the fishermen in Clogherhead or Anniegas and right along the Irish coast going to be affected? I didn't mean to scaremonger when I asked the Minister for Agriculture at the very first All-Ireland Civic Dialogue, and I compliment the officials and the organisation and the breakout sessions that happened throughout that. I asked him what happens when a kilogram of Argentinian beef bought in Newry arrives in Dundalk. What will that do for our reputation as a green country? Some people need to be reminded of the BSE outbreak, not to mention the foot and mouth issue that happened particularly in my constituency. We have a horse racing industry. Dundalk has been an all-weather track. How are people going to ensure that the whole issue of disease and equine-related issues are going to be resolved in the event of a hard Brexit? I want to know how and what are for the racing industry, as I'm sure Count Corley are acutely aware of. What happens in the environment? We've all talked about Monsanto and Roundup being banned. We decide to ban it, but the British don't. Are we wasting our time? Speaking about waste, water quality, we say only our rivers run free. What's happening in relation to all the environmental matters, from water quality to waste management? A growing problem, whether we're in the EU or not. All you have to do is go down to my constituency again and see the throwing of tyres discarded along the roadsides, not to talk about the free movement of domestic waste without licences. Where are the answers to all of these things? River basin management plans, crossing both sides of the divide. How are we going to deal with those? On transport, we've been informed by the Road Hauliers Association that €15 a tonne for every hour that a truck is left with delays. I well remember what Dundalk was like in relation to having to get customs clearance, and I know that that will be an inevitable delay that will ultimately be put on to the consumer. I'll stay on transport for a minute. What about the taxi driver or the heavy goods vehicle driver? Where's the clarity in relation to those non-Irish drivers, in relation to taking a fare to Newry, or indeed a lorry travelling with a driver who is a non-national? I can move on to strategic transport planning. We're promised a high-speed train from Dublin to Belfast. Let's get a commitment that that is going to be delivered to the people of this island. We have greenways that have been developed north and south in joint cooperation and in memorandums of understanding. Will these programmes continue? I might as well throw in the Narrowwater Bridge. If the British are so committed to leaving, why don't they give us the funding to provide that is committed to by this government and indeed by my own party? What arrangement has been made in relation to the free travel scheme for senior citizens? I'm asking these questions because there's no point in asking them when all the memorandums, all the bilaterals and this particular legislation is passed. What about trans-territorial cooperation and business development? We've just launched recently the M1 corridor between Dublin and Belfast and the importance for the industries along it. How do we ensure that the legislation allows for an all-Ireland economy? I move to a very quick one on health. I think it's well covered. What's the situation in relation to the transplantation of organs, or indeed the free movement of necessary blood stocks? Tourism, stride upon stride has been made. What's going to happen when people come into our airports in either Belfast, the two city or indeed Aldergrove, or indeed Dublin? who wish to move in either direction, who don't have the necessary who have the EU qualifications, but they not necessarily be allowed to move into one or other jurisdiction. I've asked in this House time out a number in relation to the difficulty of the people on the border region, in relation to mobile roaming charges. It's not about EU. It's about losing your call as you cross in and out on a regular basis. There should be and ought to be a clear arrangement before anything happens, and I did flag it, in relation to both mobile roaming and broadband infrastructure being shared north and south. I could throw into the mix, can somebody pull the plug on the cables that are coming from America that are coming in through the north of Ireland? I'm almost finished, but I want to make reference particularly to justice. I heard Minister Canny referred to all of the nationals who are in England. There are 5,000 people here who have British citizenship. What will happen then in the context of the EU? We have issues around family law, recognition of UK divorces, child abduction cases, currently covered under EU legislation. Where is it being catered for? Indeed, somebody now in an exit situation who wishes to take a case against somebody, say somebody living in Dundalk looking to take a case against somebody living in the north. That's not covered. You will have to sue that person, particularly if it relates to a civil matter. You will have to take the case in the jurisdiction of the individual. I'm going to conclude by saying the most important thing for me, and indeed the people I represent, has been the peace process. I did say what the PSNI said, and certainly I don't want anything to upset that valuable peace we have. We all talk about the UK being our nearest neighbours, our great trading partners, but we need to protect the mechanisms for those collaborations, whether through business enterprise, political, be it at national parliament level or indeed at local authority level. We have in this House the British-Irish Parliamentary Assembly operating very effectively in terms of relationships, and I believe that a lot of these need to be put on a stronger footing to ensure that whatever Brexit happens, that those relationships continue to build with our nearest neighbour, Oireachtas.